Uno, due, sì, prova, prova. Ahia. Welcome. Your Excellencies, Reverend Father, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to welcome you to the Pontifical Institute for Arabic and Islamic Studies, PISAI, where I have the honor to serve as president. I would like to acknowledge also those who join us online. Some of you are regular attendees of the public lectures and other events we organize every year in this beautiful library of the Institute. And it is a joy to see you again after this time of lockdown. I am particularly grateful to Ambassador Sally Axworthy for her initiative to organize today's event together with us. An event which touches upon one of the fundamental questions of our time, and if I may say, of all times, freedom of religion or belief. Before I give Ambassador Axworthy the word, I would like to recall just 2 lines from the document on human fraternity signed on the 4th of February 2019 by His Holiness Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayyib in Abu Dhabi. The document reminds us, I quote, that divine wisdom is the source from which the right to freedom of belief and the freedom to be different derives. Therefore, the fact that people are forced to adhere to a certain religion or culture must be rejected, as to the imposition of a cultural way of life that others do not accept. End of quote. May this clear statement by Pope Francis and Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayyib serve as guide for our discussion today. And please, Ambassador.
Thank you, Father Diego, and thank you for hosting us here at PISAI. We're very delighted and honoured to be here with you and to be using once again your expertise to discuss this matter. So the UK, as I think you probably know, is committed to freedom of religion or belief. About a year ago, slightly more than a year ago, the Foreign Secretary commissioned a report from the Bishop of Truro into how the Foreign Office did on promoting freedom of religion or belief, and in particular persecution of Christians, in fighting persecution of Christians. And that report was published in July last year with, I think it was 22 recommendations for how we should do this better. And we've been working on implementing those recommendations ever since. But one of the things that we are interested in is understanding the kind of intellectual and religious roots of discrimination and persecution. So not just looking at the manifestations of that, the symptoms, but trying to understand why it happens and therefore how the international community that's interested in tackling this issue can do that better. And so we thought it would be interesting to have a discussion on the role of interpretation of religious texts in this. This embassy has a previous track record of this, because in 2018 we did a conference working with the Holy See, with the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue in Frascati, on tackling violence committed in the name of religion. And it was with Christian and Muslim scholars. And what came out, I think, was the thing that struck me most from that conference was the shared feeling that religious texts were being abused, had been abused historically, and were being abused in both Christianity and Islam, and a shared determination from the scholars present to stand up against that, really, which was a kind of hopeful message that came out of it. Father Diego was an important participant in that conference. So this is a continuation of a conversation for us. We're very delighted we've got such distinguished speakers, our academics, and also our speakers from the front line, Father Fadi and Dr. Nayla Tabbara, who kind of combine theological knowledge with also an experience of living in a sort of multi-religious environment. We look forward to listening to what you have to say, and we're very grateful to you for being willing to share your ideas with us. So thank you. And now I'm going to hand over. We're very honoured to have with us Jim Shannon, MP, who is the chair of the British Parliament's all-party parliamentary group on freedom of religion or belief, and he's joining us from London. Mr. Shannon is an MP for Strangford in Northern Ireland. He's been the MP for Strangford since 2010, and he previously sat on the Northern Irish Assembly from 1998 to 2010, and he's a member of the Ecclesiastical Committee. So, Mr. Shannon, over to you.
Okay, first of all, Ambassador, ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure to be, first of all, invited to speak, and thank you for that. And indeed, it's an honour to have the opportunity to contribute to such, I believe, a wonderful event. And indeed, I've been looking forward to it since you asked me. So therefore, it's really, really nice to do it. I'd like to extend my sincere gratitude to both the Pontifical Institute for Arabic and Islamic Studies and to the British Embassy to the Holy See as well. In particular, I'd like to thank Ambassador Axworthy for kindly inviting me to participate. And I'm not speaking from London, incidentally. I'm speaking from Newton Ards, but I spend 3 days of my week in London or thereabouts. But again, it's all part of that great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, better together. So wherever you are, it's always good to be part of that. As you will all know, I am, and I've been very privileged and honoured to be the chair of the APPG, All-Party Parliamentary Group for Freedom of Religion and Belief. It's something that's always been particularly close to my heart, and something that I've had a particular interest in. And whenever Baroness Berridge and I discussed this matter way back in 2015, little knowing my understanding of it obviously as a Christian and as one who has a very, very clear faith, I wanted to speak up for those of Christian faiths across the world, but I also wanted to reach out for those of other faiths, because freedom of religious belief is those with a Christian faith, those with other faiths, indeed those with no faith, because my Lord that we worship and serve loves everyone in this world and has a desire to see them saved in a personal relationship with Him. Our group, the IPPG and freedom of religious belief, started with 30 to 40 parliamentarians originally in 2013 and 2015. It now has 125, and many MPs and peers have a deep interest in this matter. I believe that reflects the growing parliamentary interest in this issue. The interest exists not because 80% of the world's population live in countries where FORB is significantly a massive issue, but often violently restricted, because promoting FORB issues, freedom of religious belief, can help to achieve other important policy objectives. For example, as I explained in the APPG's 2017 report, Article 18, from rhetoric to reality. It's not only just about words, it's also about action, and we want to make sure we have that action in place. There's a very strong correlation between countries where freedom of religious belief is not protected and countries with high levels of conflict. And some of the things that have happened today with COVID, I mean, we're very aware that those of a Christian belief and faith and those of other ethnic beliefs in other countries and minorities, religious minorities, are also suffering because of COVID-19. They're the last people in the queue to get any help when it comes to the help that the world can give. But in other words, political priorities such as advancing human rights and the rule of law, strategic priorities such as ensuring security, economic priorities such as developing stable trading partnerships can be mutually reinforcing objectives which should be pursued together, rather than issues to be balanced one against the other. So that issue that we try to do when it comes to ensuring that countries have make central to their core issues and their core beliefs the freedom of belief, that when we help them through aid and trade and so on, that there's a balance. I believe that the UK government is increasingly understanding this truth, and I believe that in my heart. I've seen in my short time in the House of Commons a sea change of interest amongst MPs who have now, maybe because of their constituents who are very vociferous and have the ability to email and Facebook and Twitter their MPs, that there is a lot of interest. This has led to big policy changes and decisions, such as the appointment of the first ever UK Special Envoy for Freedom of Religious Belief. And of course, UK government's decision to launch the Bishop of Truro's independent report of the Foreign Commonwealth Office's work to support persecuted Christians. The others have referred to that, and data will be referred to many times, I believe, today. The APPG welcomed the many recommendations made by Bishop of Truro's report, which recognised, I believe, that freedom of religious belief must be for all groups, not just for Christians, but for those of a different faith, and indeed those of no faith. Because by doing so, I believe as a Christian that we're showing the love of our Lord and Saviour for others across the world. That seeking to protect some from persecution necessarily requires seeking to protect all from persecution. I give you one quick story. I realise that there's a time on my contributions. There was an international conference took place in September. I think it was 2017 or maybe even 2016. And that conference, there was two people from Pakistan. One was a Muslim MP and one was a Christian MP. And I always remember the story because the Christian MP got up and said, "I'm a Christian MP from Pakistan, and I'm here to speak up on behalf of Christians, but also those of a Muslim faith." And the Muslim MP from Pakistan got up and said, "I'm a Muslim MP, but I'm here to speak not only for Muslim people, but for Christians as well." So it told me about what we do. Our job is to protect faiths of all aspects that they have, and indeed of all varieties. We welcome the recommendations of, like number 11, which calls for government staff to work in countries with severe FORB violations to receive FORB literacy training and to make use of the excellent UK FORB toolkit. We've pushed hard for that through the APPG. I believe we have seen some significant refocus of government departmentally, but also centrally, and I'm very, very pleased to see that happening. These things are vitally important because for anyone to devise and implement effective pro-FORB policy, they must first have a deep and accurate understanding of the FORB context. It's really important if you want to put over the thing. They must also have an appropriate institutional structure. It is in that spirit that we have the APPG. Hope that the UK government will continue its good work in FORB by appointing a new special envoy soon, and we thank Milan for all that he has done. Such a structure is crucial if governments are going to be effective in implementing pro-FORB policy, and we hope that many countries will follow suit. Because let's make no mistake, now more than ever, FORB work is absolutely vital. Look at the world today, upwards of 1 million peaceful Muslims in concentration camps in China. Anti-Semitism on the rise globally as ludicrous Jewish COVID-19 conspiracy theories abound. Nigeria is ablaze with violence by militants, killing both Christians and Muslims. Thousands of young Hindu and Christian girls like Maria Shabazz and Sania Iqbal are kidnapped, forcibly converted and married to Pakistani men every year. I was in Pakistan in 2018. I brought those things to their attention. Of course, COVID-19 continues to rage, exacerbating the problems raised by already marginalised religious and belief communities like the Rohingya Muslims in refugee camps in Bangladesh. I conclude with this and thank you for the opportunity. It saddens me, but I believe it saddens all of us to know that things seem to be getting worse for many of these communities around the world. However, it must also strengthen our resolve and our commitment to the cause. That is why I'm deeply encouraged by the fact that there are so many people gathered here, so many around the world, who are willing to be a voice for the voiceless, to speak up for those who have no one to speak for them. I hope that we can all continue to work together to make Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights a reality, because anything less is simply unacceptable. Ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador, thank you so much. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shannon. Thank you for joining us. I know it's you've got a busy morning, so it's very kind of you to do that. I now hand over to Father Diego.
Thank you. So we call our first speaker, Craig Morrison, who is the Dean of the Faculty of Ancient and Near Eastern Languages and Literature at the Pontifical Biblical Institute here in Rome. Just a second, and we will organize things technically. As I was saying, Professor Morrison teaches at the Pontifical Biblical Institute here in Rome. The primary languages of his research are Christian and Jewish Aramaic. He is currently working on the new critical edition of the Hebrew Bible for 1st and 2nd Samuel. His English translation of the Aramaic text of Genesis in the Antioch Bible series appeared last year. And he's a member of the Carmelite order. So the floor is yours, Craig.
Thank you, Diego. Thank you for this invitation to participate in this event where I am already learning a great deal. Your Excellencies, Reverend Fathers, Sisters, ladies and gentlemen, those here present and those joining us online. As we discussed today, the theme of religious texts and the freedom of religion or belief, the very meeting of this panel is an expression of that freedom. We meet each other, we learn from each other, and build enriching reciprocal relationships. Getting to know one another is the key to our dialogue. There are two central church documents that guide a Catholic reading of sacred texts. The Vatican document De Verbum, the Constitution on Divine Revelation, and Nostra Aetate, the Declaration on the Relationship of the Church to non-Christian religions. In 1965, Nostra Aetate expressed high hopes for all peoples of faith. It begins, and I quote, "One is the community of all peoples. One is their origin. For God made the whole human race to live over the face of the earth. One is their final goal, God, divine providence, God's manifestation of goodness. God's saving design extends to all people until that time when the elect will be united in the holy city, the city ablaze with the glory of God, where all nations will walk in God's light." This document, Nostra Aetate, devotes particular attention to Islam. Quote, "The Sacred Synod urges all to work sincerely for mutual understanding and to preserve as well as promote together for the benefit of all humanity, social justice, moral welfare, as well as peace and freedom." Nostra Aetate highlights how much we share in common with other religions, but of course this document was entirely new. There was nothing that they could build upon. And so one aspect not mentioned in this short document is that we all share sacred texts together. These texts have to be interpreted in different historical circumstances and cultures throughout the centuries. Our challenge at the Pontifical Biblical Institute is to continue to interpret our texts in our present historical context and in the diverse cultures represented at the Institute. The document De Verbum addresses more specifically our question for today. It underscores that the human being is created to receive divine revelation, experiences that occur outside of language. Revelation is pre-linguistic. It is an experience like the Exodus event or the resurrection of Jesus. It is then the person's task to put that pre-linguistic experience into language, into a narrative, or into poetry that then becomes sacred scripture. When Adam was created, we read in the Bible that God breathed into him the breath of life, Nishmat Chaim, and the person became a living being. Right at this point in the Bible, the Jewish Targum Onkelos, a 3rd century Aramaic translation of the Hebrew Bible, adds a word, milalala. There was in Adam a spirit capable of speech. I like to translate this phrase more liberally. Adam became a spirit capable of narration. Adam and Eve could now not only receive divine revelation, but they could communicate that experience in language to a future generation. Narrativity is a gift from God that illustrates the close cooperation between the creature who receives and then transmits divine revelation. So the Church reads its sacred texts, aware that they are the result of human cooperation with God. God reveals the divine plan, and human beings are capable of perceiving and experiencing that plan, and then are able to articulate that plan in their diverse languages and idioms. I want to illustrate this very briefly with two paintings from Caravaggio. This is a painting you all know very well. It is in the Contarelli Chapel by Caravaggio at San Luigi Francese. So just take a quick look at it. This is Matthew writing the gospel. And notice how the angel is above Matthew, kind of with his finger pointing out, but the pen is in Matthew's hand. This is not the first painting. Many of you may know that the original painting that Caravaggio did for that chapel was the one you're now looking at presently. Unfortunately, it was destroyed during the war, so this is a colorized copy of a black and white photo. But look at the difference in the painting. Notice how the angel has his hand on Matthew's hand, and the angel, if you will, the presence of God, is actually writing the gospel. Just to take a look at the chapel, and over lunch I can explain to you why the painting was rejected. This is what the painting would have looked like in that position. So you see again, the first painting, the hand of the angel is on the hand of Matthew. So there's just a close-up of it. And just out of curiosity, you might also note that Matthew is writing the gospel in Hebrew, which was a common question in the 1600s as Caravaggio was painting at this time. But notice again the hand. And now we look at the painting that we see today. Notice the hand is no longer on Matthew's hand. But the angel is revealing, again, in what I would say now theologically, a pre-linguistic experience that Matthew now has to put into language. It is Matthew's hand. In other words, when Matthew makes a mistake in Greek that we scholars notice, it's really not God's fault. It's Matthew's cooperation with God to transmit the experience. So there we have a close-up of both hands. You see on the left, the original painting, the hand of the angel on Matthew's hand, and the painting as we see it today. The angel's hand giving the message to Matthew, and Matthew writing the text himself. So Dei Verbum underscores that the author of the sacred text lived in a particular historical moment. And this, now I quote Dei Verbum, really most important section of the document. Quote, "The biblical interpreter today must investigate the meaning of the sacred that the sacred writer intended to express and actually expressed in particular circumstances using contemporary literary forms in accordance with the situation of his own time and culture. For the correct understanding of what the sacred author wanted to assert, due attention must be paid to the customary and characteristic styles of feeling, speaking, and narrating which prevailed at the time of the sacred writer, and the patterns people normally employed at that period for everyday dealings with one another. The task of the Biblical Institute is to interpret the ancient languages of our sacred text. One quick example, 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 6. We read, "V'yiganev Avshalom et lev anashei Yisrael." A literal translation of the Hebrew, Absalom stole the hearts of the people of Israel. That English idiom means that the people came to love Absalom. But the Hebrew idiom in its ancient Israeli context meant that Absalom deceived the people of Israel. A radically different notion from a literal English translation. Dei verbum requires that we work properly to understand these ancient idioms in their historical context to read the Bible properly. Finally, a Catholic reading of our sacred text responds to the signs of our times. And we have already heard this from the ambassador and from the member of parliament. They've articulated it perfectly. For example, Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si is a rereading of the Bible in light of the damage we are doing to our environment. Such a document would make little sense in the 5th century. The document Nostra Aetate that I mentioned, recognizing the Christian persecution of the Jews through the centuries, rejected any Christian notion of what we call supersessionism. Women biblical scholars are reading the Bible in order to highlight the role of women in salvation history in direct response to the changing role of women in society. And religious violence has raised pressing questions about violent passages in our biblical texts that scholars are compelled to address today, something we have already heard. And in the parish where I live in Rome, San Martino ai Monti, the pandemic has illustrated the economic disparities that our sacred texts must address. These current questions illustrate how we are called to interpret our sacred texts for today in a way that responds to our current historical situation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Craig, for this short but very, I would say, intense presentation that has touched at the essential question today, I think. And our next speaker is Professor Wael Farouq. He is an associate professor at the Faculty of Language Sciences and Foreign Literature at the Catholic University of the Sacred Heart in Milan. Professor Farouq has taught previously in different institutions, including the American University in Cairo. His primary area of interest is the language in Islam, or the language in Islamic culture, literature, philosophy, religion, an area in which he has produced several publications. Professor Farouq is also very active for many years now in the field of interreligious and intercultural dialogue. So thank you very much for having accepted our invitation, and you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I am really grateful for the invitation, and I am honored to be here with you today. I was asked to summarize 14 centuries of intellectual activity of almost 1/4 of humanity in 10 minutes. So I was, I was forced to choose a very tiny thing to present today for you, something that you can not find online, but I hope is going to motivate you to go to search for it. I choose to start from a dramatic moment in the history of the Quran. A dramatic moment because at that moment the Quran has faced an existential threat. After very long civil wars within the Islamic world, many of people who have memorized by heart the Quran, Al-Qurra, was killed. Arab, the colonialists who left the Arabian Peninsula to live with conquested countries in Iraq, Iran, and all of these countries started to mix with them, and also their language started to mix with these people, and they start to lose the Arabic language. The second generation, in fact, was not able to speak this language as their fathers did, their direct fathers did. So Muslims felt the danger that Islamic religion is facing, and scholars massively headed to the desert, to the most isolated tribes in the desert who believed that they have still the pure Arabic language because they didn't mix with any non-Arab. And here is the second moment, which is magical moment, because can you imagine hundreds of scholars, thousands of scholars heading to the desert with their camels, with tons of paper and ink, living their everyday life as a human recorder, writing every word that comes out from a mouth of a child, of a woman, of a man, of rich, of poor. They were registering, recording everything. This lasted almost for from 30 to 50 years. And after start what we called, can we move ahead? Yes, thank you. After we started what we call the age of documentation, the age of collection and the documentation of the language, where in very short a time, only 50 years, the Arabic language now is collected, organized, classified, and the Arabic science and the Islamic science, among them, the interpretation of Quran was born. Of course, collecting the language from these very isolated tribes on desert has its, in my opinion, bad effect on the history of Islamic science, because when you, this language became the main reference to understand the Quran, but this language was extremely poor, even poorer than the language of the Quran. In the language of the Quran, we find more than 100 words, for example, comes from Greek, from Persian, from many words, from many other cultures. But this collected language was deprived of this diversity, was deprived of all vocabulary of civilization. Muhammad Abduh al-Jabri, the noted Moroccan scholar, noted that the most important Arabic lexicon, Lisan al-Arab, the tongue of Arab, this huge book, you cannot find the words that reflect the ordinary life of Muslims in the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th century. It's only the world of the Bedouin. So this collection of language has left a strong, has made a strong influence on the interpretation of the Arabic language. The second effect, that now all Islamic science that we know are divided inside between eye and ear, because this collection of the language within an oral culture made part of the Muslim mind believes only in the knowledge achieved by the ear, by transmission of knowledge from son to father, from a scholar to another. The other part, which is also from the Islamic mind, at the same time, trust in the eye of what was found in books. And all verbs in Arabic language that related to reason also related to eye. See, nadara, to look, for example, comes from the word nadariya comes from nadara, theory comes from to look, vision, opinion, ra'i comes from ra'a, to see. So we had this division of the Islamic mind between ear and the eye. I am running here, for example, a list of the Islamic science. As you see, all the Islamic science were built thanks to to a conflict between ear and the eye. In each Islamic science, we had something that adapted transmission and some part that adapt reasoning. You see in jurisprudence, for example, or fiqh, we have Ahl al-Hadith and we have Ahl al-Ra'i, people of opinion, okay? In grammar, we have as-sama', hearing, and we have al-qiyas, analogy. In Quran, Islamic Quranic commentary, we have tafsir bil ma'thur that comes from athar, which means trace, and we have tafsir bi ar-ra'i, which also. So we had this division even in theology. In all Islamic science, we have no time to present concrete examples of this, but the Islamic mind was divided in this way. One part believe in the ear as a channel of knowledge, and the other part believes in the eye as the way of knowledge. So, of course, this had its results on the interpretation of Quran, because now it's much easier to politicalize the texts of Quran. So now with the continuous civil war in Islamic world, most of tafsir, which commentary of Al-Quran was thanks or as a result of this collection of language, they were able now to use this language to build their political point of view that is based on verses of Quran. And I am going to give you an example also of this. Of course, the interpretation of Quran have started before. I am not saying that in the 2nd century, Muslims started the activity of interpretation of Quran. Of course, the first one who interpreted the Quran was the Prophet himself, his companions, and in early centuries, the successors of the companions of Prophet Muhammad were also giving their comments, and some students were writing after them. And we arrived to the 8th century, and we find the first publication of the Quranic commentaries by Sulaiman ibn Muqatil and Zayd ibn Ali. So this, I'm not saying the history started there, but I'm saying the politicalizing of the Quran, of the Holy Scripture of Islam started after this age of collection and the documentation. So in the ancient time, as you can see, we had these two big schools, tafsir bil ma'thur, tafsir bil ra'i, tradition-based interpretation and reason-based interpretation, and each school has its famous scholars, At-Tabari, Al-Qurtubi, Ibn Kathir from one side, Az-Zamakhshari, Al-Razi from the other side. And even late, like in 15th century, we find some scholars like Jalaluddin Suyuti, for example, who made Tafsir al-Jalalain, which have combined both Tafsir bil-Ma'thur and the Tafsir bil-Ra'i. Now we jump to modernity. In modern times, of course, the challenge of modernity has also modified the conflict about the interpretation of Quran. And from 19th century, we see new scholars that have to try to respond to the big questions of modernity. Everyone resulted to a specific thing. The textualists, for example, they try to go to the language and they try to build a linguistic reading of the Quran. Contextualist, of course, this is Amin al-Kholi. I don't know if this is important to say the name or not. But as you can see, there is also modernists who interpret cases like, the women in Quran, inheritance in Quran, the governance in Quran, all of these things. Thematic, which choose a particular theme and they studied. And also there is recently feminist interpretation of Quran. And from here, I am jumping to an example to make you see how big is the gap between the two ways of interpretation. We have this famous verse that coined the most diffused stereotype about Muslims, polygamy. This verse here says that men can marry up to 4 women at the same time. And this was the Muslim practice for centuries. But if we read the traditional interpretation of these verses, we see it support that practice of having more than one wife. And even another one, a little bit more extreme, Al-Layth ibn Sa'd, who used to be called the fifth of present the fifth doctrine of Islam. There are only four, but he is the Imam of the fifth doctrine of Islam, say a man can marry even 9. And here, on the basis of interpretation of the word wa in Arabic, which was translated into or, but it's not true, it's not correct. Wa means and. So he said, in the first interpretation, you are allowed to marry 2, and you are allowed to marry 3, and you are allowed to marry 4. But this one said, no, you are allowed to marry 2 plus 3 plus 4, which make 9 wives for one man at the same time. So this is the traditional school. The modernist school, okay, started from Muhammad Abduh and his student, of course, Qasim Amin, that is used to be called the liberator of the women in Islamic culture. They had a different reading because they said this verse started with a condition. If you fear to be just with the orphans, so this is the condition of polygamy. And it's not the context to speak about this, but all the regulation in Islamic law look to futures. So always the rules for the benefit of the most young, because it's for the benefit of the future of the community. So here, polygamy can be allowed only to guarantee a good future for female orphans overall. So in their reading, they said, this is a condition. And in another verse in the Quran, God says, no man can be just between the women. No man can be equal between the women. So here, the context of the Quran bans the polygamy, not confirm polygamy, because there is first the condition of orphans, second the condition to be just between women. The third verse says no man can be just between women. So what does this mean? It means polygamy is banned by Islam, not allowed by Islam. Of course, Rashid Rida, another student of Muhammad Abduh, said this can be allowed only for the public interest, al-masalih al-mursala, if it serves the community and its future. In this last minute, I would like to say in the digital era where we are living now, the transmission school is much more even present than before. I was making, my recent book was about the fatwa, so I was following the web pages of fatwa, and in one of these web pages of fatwa, the Al-Azhar page, I found this very interesting conversation with a young man who just got his new cell phone, and is playing with his, as a religious man, as a religious young man, the first thing he thought to put on his cell phone was the Holy Quran. You can download the Holy Quran in your phone. But when he started with the very slow internet in Egypt, he started to feel this very basic natural movement, the need to go to bathroom, but he resisted to go because he didn't want to waste what he already downloaded. So when he was at the edge of tolerance, the Quran was downloaded and he started to run to the bathroom, but on the step door of the bathroom, he stopped because he asked himself this question: can I enter the bathroom with my cell phone full of the words of God? Can I enter the bathroom with the Holy Quran? Of course, it seems for us dramatic, but for him it was not, because in 1 second, he sent a question to this page, and in 1 second, he received the answer. He asked the Imam, and the Imam asked him back, do you by chance memorized by heart some of the Quran? The young man said, of course, I am a good Muslim. So the Imam said to him, okay, leave out of the bathroom your heart and your cell phone. And this is what we are heading for. We have to choose between our heart and our mind. Thank you very much. I hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Farouq. And sorry, I know I asked you to summarize in 10 minutes 14 centuries of intellectual tradition. And this is really a difficult task, but you did very well. And thank you very much, Wael. Our next two speakers are joining us online from Beirut. The first one is Nayla Tabbara. She's well known to many of us. As I said before, she was last, in 27th February this year, she was here at this place giving a public lecture. That was our last event before the lockdown. So we are happy and blessed to have her again today with us. Nayla directs the Institute of Citizenship and Diversity Management at Aydan Foundation, a Beirut-based foundation of which she is co-founder. She is also a Muslim woman theologian and a university professor in religious and Islamic studies. Nayla Tabbara has published extensively in the fields of Islamic theology of other religions, education on interreligious and intercultural diversity, Quranic exegesis, and Sufism. And to you, the floor, Nayla.
We can't hear you, Nayla.
I started talking with while I was muted. So I was just thanking you, Ambassador Axworthy, and thanking you, Father Cucarella, for inviting me and here. And I still remember that my last public talk was at the PISAI in the presence of both of you on the 27th of February, before we all went into lockdown. So, so I hope this means that soon we will get out of this the corona limitations. The talks until now have been very rich, and I need to also put in 10 minutes my comments on actually both the speakers that spoke before me. Maybe the first point that I would like to address is related to our title. The title of our panel is Religious Scripture, Interpretation of Religious Scripture, and Freedom of Religion or Belief. In my work in this field, I learned how to differentiate between a theology of diversity, which I presented last time I was at the PISAI, and a theology for freedom of religion or belief. I learned to separate between both. In what sense? The theology of diversity tries to see from within my tradition how other faiths are also paths of salvation. Freedom of religion or belief teaches me something else, or expects something else from me. What it expects is that whatever my theology is concerning other religions, I could be exclusivist. I could believe that all others are going to hell in my belief. But in practice, what is asked from me, or also in belief, what is asked from me is to believe of the right of everybody to believe whatever they want, whether this will take them to hell according to me or not. So there's a distinction between both. In a pluralist theology of other religions, I see other religions as paths of faith, and I accept them, of course, in the public domain. In FORB, I am not asked to change my theology of how I perceive other religions, but I'm asked, in FORB, Freedom of Religion or Belief, I'm asked to respect the right of conscience of everyone. So this is something else. And until now, what is interesting is if Islamically, until now, we don't have yet documents or official documents from Al-Azhar or from important Islamic centers around the world about pluralism, a pluralistic theology of other religions. We do have documents that tackle freedom of religion or belief. We have one sentence in the document, the fraternity document, about diversity being the will of God, which allows us to start building a pluralist theology of other religions. So this document that is signed by the Imam of Al-Azhar and Pope Francis. So it allows us Islamically also, because it was signed by the Imam of Al-Azhar, to build on it a theology of diversity. But we also have in the same document, they stress on freedom of belief and freedom of conscience. We have another document, an earlier document from Al-Azhar from 2012 that talks about freedoms, among which the freedom of belief. This document reduces freedom of belief mainly to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but it's already a beginning. It was followed by another document from Lebanon, from a big organization in Lebanon called the Maqasid Institute. And it's a civil organization, an Islamic civil organization in Lebanon. And so it's a document about freedom of belief or religious freedom. And it goes beyond that. It talks about the inherent human dignity of each person, and from that human dignity, develops the inalienability of human conscience, that each person is responsible over their own conscience. And they go back to a few verses of the Quran, and I'm going to quote a few of them now, just to give you an idea that we have in the Quran itself, next to the verses that talk about diversity and diversity of religions, there are other verses that allow us to build a theology of freedom of religion or belief, such as this famous verse talking in Surah Al-Baqarah, talking about no compulsion in religion. We have other verses saying, for example, that if in Surah Yunus, verse 108, whoever accepts guidance accepts it to his own benefit, and whoever goes astray does this to his own detriment. So each one is responsible on their own. Another verse in Surah Al-Isra, Surah 17, it says that you are enough to take your own account. You are in charge of yourself, basically. Another in Al-Ma'idah, take care of your own selves. The one who has gone astray does not harm you if you are on the right path. And other verses that repeat to the Prophet Muhammad that it is incumbent upon you to convey the message only, but you cannot retribute people. Retribution is to God, and many verses are like that. So if they're saying this to Muhammad, then definitely it is like that to other Muslims. So to other Muslims, you have no right to go into other people's conscience or to see other people what they are doing with what they're believing in or how they are doing their practices. So these are examples of verses that allow us to start building a theology of freedom of religion or belief that would come as an addition or as another side of the balance next to pluralism, to theology, to a pluralistic theology of other religions. With both, we can advance, I think, the not only dialogue and acceptance of the other, but really human rights and the belief that each person has the right to believe or not believe. Definitely, this would also, of course, tackle the issue of apostasy and today also there is work in the Islamic world, but not yet officially, on apostasy, re-explaining it and explaining also that in the Quran, an apostate, a person that changes religion, does not receive any punishment in this world. God says God will retribute. So also going back to that, and so trying to establish a framework of human rights in the religious interpretation and current modern religious discourse. I will stop here and thank you.
Thank you, dear Nayla, for your always stimulating comments. And our fourth speaker for today, or for this part of our event, is also talking with, from Beirut, is Fadi Daou. He is co-founder and president of Aydan Foundation, so co-founder with Nayla Tabbara, where he contributes in Lebanon and also internationally to the promotion of coexistence, interfaith relations, and inclusive citizenship. Fadi Daou is the author of several publications in subjects such as Christian theology of religions, citizenship, interreligious relations, and also the geopolitics of religions. He has been involved in many local and international initiatives promoting peace, inclusive citizenship, and religious freedom. And he is also a priest in the Maronite Church. So, Father Daou, the floor is yours.
Thank you, dear Father Diego, and thanks also to Ambassador Axworthy for the invitation. It's always a pleasure to be together, building up our thinking about these fundamental challenges for our times. And I would like also to greet all the distinguished speakers, the audience. I saw on the camera our ambassador, Dr. Farouq, there also. So greetings to all of you. I do regret, of course, as Nayla said, we are not meeting in person. There is one advantage, maybe speaking on Zoom, is that we don't have to put the mask. So at least we are seeing each other's faces. So very briefly, because it was so rich what we heard until now, but so condensed also. I will just focus on three quick points, in fact, and maybe complementing what you heard until now, more than commenting, and taking more the side of religious freedom, more than the interpretation, because I think this would help in complementing the approach and looking at it from the current political context, the global context where we live today. So I will have 3 points, and briefly I will share a small conclusion after each. The first one is about interpretation, in fact. So if I look to this concept, not only from a historic and theological perspective, but also from, I can say, a political perspective, interpretation engages humanity. And any interpretation effort is, from my perspective, a democratic effort. Because any interpretation involves not only the relation between the reader and the text, the one who is reading the text, it involves also the one who wrote the text, the one who is reading the text itself, but the context also. And we cannot pretend, and we know how much mistakes and dangerous maybe errors were made during the history when some interpreter pretended, either formal institutions or individuals were pretending that their interpretation is the only right interpretation of what the text wants to say. So history, I think, taught us enough to accept that interpretation is a democratic act, and it is part of the public opinion debate. Nostra Aetate were mentioned, for example, Vatican II. We know that those who hugely contributed to the Vatican II Council were banned a few decades before or a few years before by the official authority in the Catholic Church because of their teaching. And then they became those who contributed to shape let's say the kind of reformation of this Catholic teaching also. So interpretation, I would say, it's a challenge for absolutism. It's a challenge for an absolute authority, and it's a challenge for the absolute truth also, which is a very essential challenge that we need in our daily life. And interpretation takes the truth to the public sphere, which means that it becomes part of the debate. And here, maybe adding to what Nayla said, personally, I'm convinced that I wrote about this, that we need to do a shift in our understanding of truth, and to accept that truth is relative, but belief can be absolute, which means my belief, I can believe that it is an absolute belief, but I cannot pretend that it is the universal truth that is imposed on everybody in society, which means no more interpretation and no more relations between, or healthy relations between people. And here I would reach my first conclusion about this first point. In Aydan Foundation, we advocate, in fact, to use the terminology of freedom of religion and belief, and not only freedom of religion or belief, because this or, I think, reflects more a Western debate a few decades ago, while the and should reflect the necessity today to accept that within each religion, we can have different beliefs. And so I need to have the freedom of religion and of believing differently within the religion, which we saw today. In fact, I think the great presentations that we heard today are part of the belief within Islam or within Christianity itself. And this is crucial, I think, for our societies today. My second point, it's about the relation, I would say, between form and interpretation. And here we are at the heart of the relation between the public authorities, states, governments, I would say, and religion and the communities. And this is the relations that in some contexts were in somehow denied in some countries, let's say, or in some contexts, because of the fear of religion interfering in politics, or vice versa. Whereas I think the last years we saw how much this relation is being built and sometimes is being misused and dangerously manipulated. So my point here is we need to accept that form is needed for religion and for good governance. And I mean by this is, as far as our societies are democratic, I think theological interpretations becomes dynamic interpretations and makes from religion a dynamic path for believers. And as far as interpretation is open, I think more religious voices will defend for also and the human rights and the human dignity. And if we try to impose one pretending being primary interpretation or official interpretation or absolute interpretation of a text, we will lose the religious voices who will be defending for human dignity and human rights from a universal perspective. And even this can happen on the political level too. This is why my conclusion here, and this is related also to the Truro report, it was mentioned, and we are happy to do also a work in collaboration with the FCO in Iraq, a study about the Christian community in Iraq in relation to applying one of the recommendations of the Truro report. And I can conclude here very briefly saying that it's very dangerous, and this is a tendency that we have today. If form is approached either from a political or from a religious perspective as an identity-based conflict or struggle, and this is very dangerous on form itself, and on those who are suffering persecutions and lack of form, while from my perspective, it has to be based on the sanctity of a human conscience, that it has to be recognized on a universal level, and so defended universally. And I go to my third and last point to say, this approach, I think, put us before two challenges. The first challenge is the question of religious authority vis-a-vis the text, and the interpretations of text, and the status of theological narrative. Especially in the framework of countering violent extremism and answering violent extremism by religious authorities, especially in the MENA region and in the Middle East. We heard, for example, and we had an increase in what I can call a primary narrative or a formal official narrative coming from for example, from Al-Azhar, and saying, this is not Islam, this is Islam. Or this is not what we have to, how we have to understand this verse. This is the true interpretation, understanding of this verse. And personally, I would think, either it was from a Muslim, Christian, or any religious perspective, this proves that to be a counterproductive approach of interpretation. Even though if we have today a wise authority who is promoting an interesting interpretation of a verse, but if we look on the ground, this has very limited influence on people. And I will give a concrete example compared to the online narrative and the competition of interpretation on the online in the online public sphere today. Very brief example, and I will finish with this. We identified two persons, one Coptic young man and one young Muslim lady, who are neighbors who live together in a remote village in Upper Egypt, where there is a conflict in this village, and some lost their lives because of this conflict related to the building of a church between the radical Muslims and the Coptic community who was trying to build the church. What they did, Sameh and Hana, this young Coptic man and women, they organized simple peace-building educational activities for the children of the village together to avoid the transmission to them the conflict of their parents. We identified their stories. We saw that this is a real form, action there. We filmed their stories in 2 minutes and 20 seconds film. In 1 month, the film got 4.5 million views in Egypt, and they became national heroes. And they received from the Ministry of Youth and Education the national award for coexistence and civil peace. This small video, compared to the video of Al-Azhar that was promoting the right interpretation of the verse, who got some thousands of views. And same for the video of the Coptic Pope. So just giving this example to finish by saying, if we want, and this is the great, I think, and I'm not surprised by this great combination that was proposed to us today by interpretation and form. If you want to make it positive, this combination, I think we need to promote religious literacy and the democratization of religious literacy and thinking and debate. Secondly, to promote critical thinking. And thirdly, to promote what I call existential narrative, which means also the contribution of people through their life in promoting form while living their own faith. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Father Daou, for again a very stimulating intervention, which has opened many yours and of the speakers before. I think we all have many questions in mind right now. We don't have much time, but I would suggest that maybe we can collect 3 short interventions by those here present with us, and they can be just a comment or maybe also a question addressed to any of our 4 speakers. Let's collect 4 of them, and that will give us also the chance to share among ourselves here present. So you are most welcome. Perhaps, Ambassador, you want to say something first?
I could just add that if anyone wants to put a question online, we'll collect them as well. I mean, I suppose my comment was, I mean, these presentations are very heartening, really, all of them. I think about, from the Professor Morrison, about the importance, the current importance of interpreting biblical texts for our modern day, and then from Professor Farouq about the different traditions in Islam, which helps us understand a bit how people arrive at different conclusions, and then to Nayla and Fadi for bringing it up to date and linking it to form. I mean, when I had this feeling when we had our discussion in Frascati, I feel this needs to be known much more widely than in this room. And so maybe the question is, I mean, I think Fadi has in some ways started to answer it, but, you know, what ideas are there for taking this debate into the public sphere? Because when I was organising this, somebody said to me, it sounds a bit niche, but I don't really think it is a niche discussion. I think it's sort of, in a way, fundamental to our world.
So, Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Morocco.
Thank you so much for that occasion. Thank you, Ambassador Sally. Thank you, President PISAI. I want just to add, to thank you at first, and for that diversity, for that diversity of opinion of religious in that meeting. And want just to add to my colleague Muslim that in our conviction to believe to the freedom is a part of conviction, or is a part of faith. And so you are not a good Muslim if you don't accept the diversity and don't believe that the diversity is a volunty of God, and it is one of the objectives of the creation of human. So it is said several times in the Quran, in the Holy Quran, that the diversity is a fatality and is a volunty of God, and also is a part of our conviction. And the creation of human has one of its objectives, that diversity. And so we cannot be a good Muslim if you don't give the other the chance to be different, and the chance to believe differently, and to have other manner to see the world. And so I would like just to add that, and to felicit all the communication and the riches of the intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. His Excellency, the Ambassador of Lebanon.
Hello. Yes. Well, a comment and a question. A comment regarding... To do what?
To
I can
turn to the camera.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Now, the work that Aydan is doing, Father Daou and his associates are doing, is really avant-gardist, I would say. And now he mentioned the work that was done in Egypt at the what I call at the grassroots level. And I think this is now of great significance. The work that has been done so far has been at, let's put it, official/elite level, which may or may not touch the average people and the population in general. I think this kind of step is important, necessary, with significant impact. So congratulations for the work you're doing, and we expect more, in fact. My question is addressed to Professor Farouq. He talked about modernity. Well, he went through many centuries, of course. This was a very interesting presentation. You associated modernity with 19th century, I think. And at the same time, we have two contemporaries who are completely different, Muhammad Abduh and Rashid Rida, the Salafi and the more mainstream. So where do we stand today in this sequence of what you call modernity or something else, especially in the post-empire era in the Middle East, in the Arab world, in the Muslim world, and elsewhere. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador, for your question. In fact, I am not very much for this modernity-Islam conflict or dialogue, because people speak about a movement of modernization of Islam from one side, and the other people speak about Islamization of modernity from the other side. But what really exists in reality is coexisting of negative elements of modernity and Islam at the same time. This is the great problem. The conflict between the form and its content. The form of parliament, for example, in contradiction with the content of democracy, because usually parliaments justify tyranny, for example, in some cases. So starting from the reality, there is an intellectual effort to build a culture that's neither modern nor Islamic. And we have to read all this effort in this context, in my opinion. So Muhammad Abduh, from one side, had his very progressive points of view, and this very same person has totally the opposite. The same, a great liberal leader like Saad Zaghloul, the great leader of liberalism in Egypt, he is the one who went against Taha Hussein and Ali Abdul Razik when he published his book speaking about against the caliphate. So we see this contradiction is not living within the tradition, but within every person. So I think what we should really address is this harmony between these elements of modernity and these elements of Islam. Because, and here, if I may, in 1 second, comment also on the beautiful intervention of Nayla. We have in our tradition a lot of basis of pluralism. There is a group in 10th century, or like at least it's believed they lived in 10th century, Brother of Purity, that gave a very beautiful metaphor to explain the religious diversity. They said God is like a doctor, humanity is like a person who got sick. He had pain in his stomach, went to God, God described for him a medicine. After some time, he got sick again, but in his heart this time, went to God again, God described for him another medicine, get sick again in his head, went to God, God described a third medicine to him, and so on. And they comment, as the medicines are not one against the other, as there is no contradiction between different medicines, also there is no contradictions between different religions, because each religion is a response to a human need that was emerged in a certain reality, in a certain moment of human history. So we have a lot as basis of this diversity in our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Farouq, for this beautiful metaphor. And I see that the Ambassador of Morocco would like to say something. Do we? No, please, please.
I want just to add at the beginning, I'm the ambassador of Morocco, but also I'm a professor in the university before. So I would just to add, in linking to that question, I think it's not a matter of modernity. It's a matter of continuation of effort, intellectual effort. And so for each time, there were nature of problems, new problems, new the civilization. And so if an effort intellectual should be given to respond to those produce. So when we speak about the modernization, in my mind, we are speaking about the new answers given to find solution for the new problems that were not known before. And so it's not a matter of modernity. Necessarily, there were a lot of new challenges, democracy, freedom, etc. And so we are, as a thinker, as a researcher, we have to bring solution and answer to new problems. And so we are in the continuation. That why we find some difference between position, and it's a matter also of context. At the same time, you can find answer in Morocco, for example, different from the answer here in Europe, in other country. So it's a problem of context in the time and in the geography also.
Thank you. I'm looking at, is there another intervention? So perhaps a very last and brief intervention, because I'm here, and then we'll proceed with our last speaker. So, Her Excellency the Ambassador of the Netherlands.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I enjoyed this immensely, especially the linguistic examples that everybody gave. I just wanted to ask, for instance, Professor Morrison, does this mean that now the issue of the interpretation of the expression fratelli tutti has been settled?
So, Professor Morrison, a quick answer.
This is a modern linguistic question. I think in 1950, fratelli tutti probably covered, and it was how language is being used. That's not the question of what is the correct, it's how language is being used. And today, you wouldn't use that in Italian to say fratelli to include women. You just wouldn't. And so we don't say, what should language be? We ask, how is language being used? And so your question is raised properly, and we should be observing how language is being used and incorporate how language is used. So people still say in English, man on the moon. That may be offensive, but you'll still hear it in the New York Times. You'll still hear it. So that's being used. So one might be allowed to continue to use that expression, but you can't say today, there were 30 men at this meeting. That would be just absolutely inappropriate. It's not used. So that's how I would respond to that kind of a very, very important question today.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's time, thank you to all of you who expressed some comments or questions. And in this, I know that we haven't exhausted the topic, but I think we are addressing the right, some of the fundamental questions of our times. And I hope there will be more occasions like this to continue thinking together. So our last speaker is Monsignor Indunil Kodithuwakku, a member of the clergy of the Diocese of Badulla in Sri Lanka, who is currently Secretary of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue, where he has worked since 2012. And before working for the Vatican, Monsignor Indunil taught at the Faculty of Missiology of the Pontifical Urban University, commonly known as the Urbaniana. So we are honored by your presence with us today.
Excellencies, Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, first and foremost, let me thank the organizers for extending an invitation for me to take part in this important panel discussion. I also bring to you warm greetings from His Eminence Cardinal Laioso and from the staff of the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue. I was told that my presentation or intervention should not exceed beyond 5 minutes. So the first point is, let me quote from the document Human Fraternity. It says, one of the causes of terrorism is an accumulation of incorrect interpretations of religious texts for the purpose of achieving objectives that are political, economic, and worldly and short-sighted. And then the first point I want to underline is the relationship between text and the context. Each text emerge in a specific context. We heard it from both sides. People of faith turn to their sacred scriptures in time of trouble and weakness, as well as in time of joy and gratitude. People look at the text when they seek guidance and refer to them when they have to make major decisions. The way in which we understand texts is naturally informed by what is happening around us. The relationship between text and the diverse contexts is therefore one of the main topics in scriptural interpretations. Today we live in a world where there is polarization, radicalization of religions, and also religion and violence. It was said at the very beginning that this issue is one of the fundamental questions of all time, freedom of religion. And it is a problem, a burning issue for a simple believer. It is a burning issue for religious leaders. It is also a diplomatic issue, and it is an economic issue because tensions, wars, conflicts affect countries economically. And then it is also a political issue. So here we find the prevailing situation has an impact on the interpretation of the text. And what would be the solution? How can we address to this prevailing situation? How can we build a culture of fraternity, culture of respect, an inclusive culture, a culture of compassion? And then we need to have education as the basic principle. In sociology, there's a word socialization. Socialization is the process by which the child learns the culture of its society. So socialization also includes religious socialization, learning religious interpretations or knowledge, narratives of a particular religion. And for this matter, the first point is when it comes to education, importance of the family and education. How can family transmit correct attitudes towards other religions? That is, there we plant the seed for an inclusive a society with respect and coexistence. And then on that seed, when child grows, we need also the educational system, because we have today the education which is partial, which is narrow-minded, which is not holistic, and it creates divisions instead of social harmony. And then we also need to pay attention to use of media and education. It was also said, emerge this issue because there is biased news, fake news, one-sided communication, which present a negative image of the other. And in this regard, therefore, it is important also to create educational programs aimed at developing skills to identify and combat the scourge of bias and baseless information, as well as xenophobic narratives. Then also another point would be to tackle this religious fundamentalism, extremism, is learning about protecting and affirming the other. So education also needs to encourage a positive vision of the human beings who are different from us. Any inadequacy or inaccuracy of the presentation of the other religions or minority communities in situations where members of a particular religious or ethnic group control educational system and curricula needs to be addressed, because minority tensions can reflect also in the educational system and also in the curricula. Last point is the question of the learning from the other and with our scriptures. So it is also necessary that one needs to know one's own scripture, a solid knowledge of one's own scripture, and also a fairly good knowledge of the other scriptures, so that there is less space, occasion for prejudice. And also today there is emerging trend also scriptural reasoning, that is for a particular elite group, because that with hospitality you come together to discuss a particular text, and then even though there are disagreements, you create a community of hospitality. And the main goal of this community of hospitality and respect is to address the social issues or heal the wounded world. So with these words, I would like to conclude my presentation while thanking once again for organizers for inviting me to be part of this important discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Monsignor Indunil, for your being with us today and for these important thoughts and reflections you have shared with us. I had the first word this morning, so I think it's fair that I give the last word to Ambassador Axworthy. Before that, I would just like to thank you, all the personnel of PISAI and of the British Embassy to the Holy See who have helped to prepare this event with a lot of because we were dealing with these new technologies and we are trying new things, but it worked very well, I think. So thank you very much to you.
So I'd just like to say thank you very much, Father Diego, for partnering with us on this. I feel that partnering with you enables us to go to places where we wouldn't have the confidence to go without you. And because this is a subject where we need expert guidance, and I think we've had that in spades this morning from our professors, from Nayla and Fadi, and from Monsignor Indunil. So I just thank you for collaborating with us, and I hope we can continue this conversation because it's very enriching. Thank you.
Thank you all of you.